All right, hello and welcome, friends. Back with another review for House of the Dragon. I'm really sorry that I didn't review episode 3. This past week has just been, life, and I didn't get the chance to review it. I do have a couple of notes, though, that I just kind of want to give a quick overview of some of the things I liked and one particular thing that I thought was a little silly. So we'll still keep it spoiler free for those that haven't seen it. But overall, I thought it was a pretty good episode. It was one of my notes that will also extend to episode 4, not just episode 3, is that, Paddy Considine is still just, he's phenomenal. I've mentioned in, I think, every video so far that Millie Alcock is doing a great job, and she continues to do a terrific job. But I am really, really loving Paddy Considine, and I hope I'm saying that right. But I really love what he's doing with this character. He's terrific. And so he was particularly good in episode 3, but that also does extend to episode 4 as well, because he's just terrific. We got to see some pretty cool dragon action in episode 3. The episode starts out with some dragons kind of lighting up all of the crab feeders' armies, and you get to see some people burning, and it's pretty gross. And it's always good to see some good dragon action. There were some complaints online about some of the tactics that were used. I guess this could be considered a minor spoiler, but eventually the crab feeders' armies learn to hide in these caves, and so the dragons can't get to them, basically. And I was seeing some complaints online about things that they could do in order to flush them out of the caves and stuff, which I think some of that is valid. But at the same time, I always, to an extent, I always give battle scenes in any sort of movie or TV show a little bit of slack, because if they were using, most of the time, if they were using genuine, realistic military strategies, it wouldn't be very interesting to watch. And that's the entire point of most of these things, but especially in a fantasy type environment. Depending on what the movie's going for, if they're trying to sell that really authentic experience, that's different. But in a fantasy show like this, I'm always willing to cut it a little bit of slack. That doesn't mean that they can do whatever they want. Some of the later episodes in Game of Thrones definitely prove that is, if you go too far in the unrealistic direction, then it's just like, okay, what are we even doing here? Come on, guys. But I'm always willing to cut a little bit of slack. I guess this would be considered a spoiler, so these last two will be kind of spoilers, but if you don't want to see them, I'll make sure to set up chapters on this video so you can just skip right to when I start talking about episode 4. And we will talk about some spoilers with episode 4 as well, so I'll have a non-spoiler section and then a spoiler section. So the big thing that I'm kind of going back and forth on is that, so Daemon kills the crab feeder, and I would have liked to see that fight, but at the same time, Daemon is obviously a very, very skilled swordsman, and we don't know much about the crab feeder, but I would struggle to think that he would be as skilled as Daemon is. And so that fight might not have been very interesting. It might have taken Daemon all of, 20 seconds to just wreck this guy and then move on. But watching him carry out the crab feeder's body by his arm, and it's just the top half of the body, that was super gross. And I thought that was kind of cool. So that was cool. So the only real problem I had with the whole end fight is that Daemon just goes trucking through, and all of the arrows, of course, miss him until they don't. And I know that you could make the argument of, well, these archers are up on these cliffs, and even though there's a lot of them, the odds of them hitting Daemon are pretty slim, which I think there is some merit to that argument. But at the same time, to me, that's just one of those really annoying cliche tropes that I'm just tired of seeing, where the hero goes running through some sort of no man's land-esque place where it's like, okay, anyone who runs out there gets killed, and then whether that's like arrows or guns or whatever, and then when the hero goes running through, all of a sudden everyone that's on the opposing side, all of a sudden they can't hit anything. And it's like, come on, guys, really? Like, that was, at least show him like running with a shield or trying to take cover or something, something to try and sell that a little bit. but he just trucks straight through. So when he gets to the point where he's trying to get to, he does hide under some, I think it's the remnants of a boat. But up until that point, he's just running straight through open area. And, that's the kind of thing where it's like, really? Are we still doing this? So other than that, though, I thought it was a pretty solid episode. There was some really great stuff in there. And, yeah, sorry again that I didn't get a specific video out for that. This last week has just been dealing with some personal stuff, and it just didn't happen. So wanted to give a quick overview or a quick highlights for episode 3, and now we can get right into episode 4. So like I mentioned before, there are some spoilers I'm going to want to go over, but we'll discuss those after, and I'll set up a chapter for that so that you can either skip those or skip to that if you want to watch that part. So again, really, really great episode. One of the things that I really liked about this was that there was a lot of, at least from the way I interpreted it, that's a hard thing to say, there's a lot of groundwork being laid in this episode. We get some conflicts between Rhaenyra and Viserys. We get some conflicts between Viserys and the Hightowers. There's a little bit of stuff between him and Alicent, and then between him and Otto. There's some set up for contention just with Alicent and her, I assume, will be her reasoning for wanting to take the throne. Well, not her, but her son, Aegon, to take the throne. Because the first couple episodes seemed to be pretty pro-Rhaenyra when it came to picking sides in the Dance of the Dragons. And I mean, that's one way to go. The three options that the showrunners have would basically be make it seem like Rhaenyra's the choice, make it seem like Alicent's the choice, or do stuff for both of them and kind of let the audience decide. And so at first I thought that they were going to kind of push Rhaenyra as more of the favorite, but I think that they are, with some of the stuff that they did with Alicent this episode, I think that they are going to try and lean in a little bit more into the gray area for both sides. And I love that, because that, to me, that's a lot more interesting in a world like this. There's nothing wrong with stories that have a clear protagonist, a clear antagonist, clear good guys, clear bad guys, but in Westeros and this world, it's mainly about gray characters. And even if you have a character who's a good guy, they might do things that aren't good. And that was one of the things that I was actually a little bit disappointed with when it came to how Jon was treated in Game of Thrones as it went on, is especially in, the books. We obviously only go till book 5, but especially once he becomes Lord Commander, he makes a couple decisions that are a little questionable. And that's interesting to me, versus in the show, I mean, he always had bits of it, but especially once he gets resurrected, he basically just becomes, no, my honor is paramount and I have to do the right thing, even though, and that's so not interesting to me, especially because it really only hurts him to do that. There's so many scenarios where it's like, you don't have to tell anyone about whatever this thing is, and either nothing would happen or it would actually be a benefit to you and not hurt anyone else to not tell them, but then he still has to just tell them because, oh, my honor, and it's just, it depends on how it's done, of course, but that type of character, I mean, I don't know, even Ned had a lot of that, but towards the end of season 1, and I guess the first book, he was willing to sacrifice his honor for his family, and so even he was able to have a little bit of I can't think of the right word, but it made his character more interesting because he wasn't just blindly sticking to his honor and everything, and that's how they ended up making Jon do this. But going into the later seasons of Game of Thrones is a whole separate thing, so we won't. I'll cut it off there. But my point was that hopefully they make this more of a gray character interaction with Rhaenyra's kids and Alicent's kids, because that's a lot more interesting to me, and I really like that. So we got to see Daemon come back, which is pretty exciting. He cut his hair, which made me a little sad. I've always been like into medieval type movies and TV shows. I like the long hair, even if it doesn't look good. And so when he came back and his hair was short, it was like, no, come on. So that was kind of a dumb little thing. But so there's not a whole lot more I can talk about. Well, actually, there's a couple more things that I can talk about without getting into spoilers. So one of the other things, so it's two separate things, but they're kind of linked, is we actually get to see some secret passages in King's Landing, which I really liked, because that's something that's talked about, that's something that's talked about just all throughout the books, and I can't remember how much it's mentioned in the show because it's been a while since I've watched the show all the way through, but they talk about how I believe it was Magor, the Cruel, who was the one who wanted all these really extensive secret passages, and then he killed all the builders that worked on it so that no one except for him would know where all the secret passages were. And in Game of Thrones, you get to see a secret passage at the end of season 4 when Tyrion is let out, but other than that, you don't really get to see a whole lot of the secret passages. And so I thought that was a fun little thing to be able to be like, hey, cool, we actually get to see a little bit of the secret passages. And in addition to that, we got to see a little bit of the underbelly of King's Landing, which I also really liked, because that's another thing that this world tries to push, is that even though King's Landing is the capital and is the central seat of royalty, it's also kind of a really disgusting city. And the show got into that a little bit for sure. But it was, and even House of the Dragon did a little bit earlier when it was establishing Daemon as the leader of the City Watch and the Gold Cloaks. But I really liked being able to see kind of more of the rundown, seedy peasantry part of King's Landing. I thought that was really cool to get a little bit of a glimpse into that and to see what's going on there and to see a little bit more about how the common folk react and kind of what they do when the sun goes down and what's going on in their free time. I thought that was really interesting. So I really liked being able to see that. Aside from that, we can't really get into any more specifics without spoilers, so I'm just going to wrap up my non-spoiler part here. This episode was a lot more of the politics side of it, and I really, really liked it. Again, Paddy Considine is he's so good. I'm really sad that he's going to have a limited appearance because he's doing a really terrific job with this role, and I'm really, really, I'm sure like a few people, and I think I mentioned this in my very first review too, I was a little unsure about him because I've mainly only seen him in comedy stuff. I know that he's done some dramatic roles, but I just haven't seen them, so it's like, well, I don't know, it's the guy from Hot Fuzz and The World's End, but he's been amazing so far. I've really, really liked him. And everyone else is obviously doing a terrific job as well. So this will be the end of the non-spoiler section, but definitely check it out. And now we'll go ahead and get into spoilers. So I'm trying to decide the best way to kind of talk about the few things that I want to talk about. So I think the best way will be to talk about the kind of the different sets of conflicts. So this episode starts with Rhaenyra being on her marriage tour, basically, with a whole bunch of suitors that Viserys set up for her, and of course she's rejecting everyone, whether that's because they're too old or too young, or her heart's obviously not very into it anyways, and you can feel that, but it seems like just a lot of the suitors are not great. And kind of the cool thing is that we actually got to see the start of the Blackwood versus Bracken conflict. If you are a little bit more into the lore, the little kid that kills the older guy, that was kind of cool to see that felt, I don't know if I'd call it an Easter egg, although you could probably classify it as one, but and even I'm not like a super lore nerd, but even I was like, hey, that's kind of cool. I kind of know what's going on with that. So that was a fun little thing to understand. As far as I remember, they don't really play into the story until the Blackfire Rebellion, which is not part of the Dance of Dragons. So I don't think it will be relevant to this show, but it is it was still kind of cool to see. So, but because Rhaenyra comes home early from that, it sets up some problems with her father that then get resolved at the end of the episode, which we'll get to in a second, of her basically doing her adamant, I don't want to get married, or I haven't found someone I want to get married to yet. And then, it's a good setup for some contention, but then she also has a really, really cool conversation with Allison. And this kind of sets up some of the stuff that Allison is going through. So she mentions that before she was the Lady Alicent, and that she still likes to believe that that's who she is, but she says that now whenever anyone addresses her or talks to her, all they see is the Queen. And there's also, so she was talking about how she was a little jealous of Rhaenyra because Rhaenyra gets to basically see all these men that want her, and Allison is talking about, like, how can that possibly be a bad thing that you're seeing all these, you get to see all these men and all these suitors that you basically get to take your pick. And Rhaenyra actually has a pretty decent retort where she talks about how, no, they don't want me, they want the crown, and they want my Targaryen blood, basically, for their children. And so I think both of those are, those are perfectly valid. I think that Rhaenyra has a right to, she understands that that's part of the political game, and she's not happy about it, which is perfectly valid. But then Allison is also trying to look at it in a different way and say, hey, you kind of get to take your pick, which is pretty cool. And then Rhaenyra talks about how she doesn't want, and I can't remember the exact dialogue, but basically she doesn't want to just sign up to be someone's wife and start cranking out babies for him. It's essentially what she says. And then Allison gets kind of sad because that's basically what she is. And Rhaenyra is like, oh, hey, sorry about that. But then we get this really disturbing scene later with Allison and Viserys, and he's wants to make more children. Actually, is she pregnant right now? I don't know. He wants to get some. And so it's basically just showing her more or less just dealing with it. And I think that was really powerful because it really shows that she's kind of realizing, I'm sure that because her dad pushed her into trying to become the queen anyways, but I also feel like there was a part of her that wanted it, because who doesn't want to be the queen? But it feels like now that she's been the queen for a little bit, she's kind of starting to realize the drawbacks and the bad things about that. And I'm sure that she's going to kind of feel resentment towards Viserys, and especially towards Rhaenyra, because she's going to be like, well, I went through all this crap, and my son is going to be the king. I thought that this was one of the parts that laid some really great groundwork for her character to have her justification and her reasoning for why she thinks that her line are the ones that should be on the throne. And they also did a really good job, I think, of making Viserys just gross. Like, he's, and that's nothing against Paddy Considine. It's just he's got sores on his back from the things that we've seen earlier in the season, and you can tell that he's getting increasingly more just weary, and it feels like he wants to be done with it all. Like, he's got all these problems with all of his family members and the people in his court, and he's getting tired of it, and I felt like that really showed. So yeah, so we kind of built towards that. Something else that I thought was an interesting thing to address is that in the books, it never definitively states. There's a point where Rhaenyra is accused of having slept with Daemon, and then there's a point where she's accused of having slept with Kristen Cole, and then there's also a bit more kind of intrigue there where it's like, did she actually sleep with him, and did she try and seduce him, or did she try to seduce him and he rejected her because of his honor and his duty as a Kingsguard, and she just made stuff up. Like, there's a whole lot of things there, because her kids eventually end up having brown hair, which is what kind of leads to people suspecting that she is that her kids are not entirely from her line. And so this episode, Daemon takes her out and wants to get down, and from what I understood, he ends up leaving, because I wasn't entirely sure why he ends up leaving partway through. I wasn't sure if he was having performance problems or if it was something else. And I believe in the after the episode thing that they do, I believe that it was said that so I was hearing some stuff say that he couldn't go through with it because he knew that it was wrong, but I've also heard some other things that to me sound a bit more in line with Damon's character, where he was going to use that as almost like a power play, where he was going to kind of gain control over Rhaenyra, but then also he'd be able to slight Viserys with it. But then Rhaenyra ended up kind of getting into it and wanting to go along with it, and so that kind of ruined the control that he would have had, and that's why he left. I'm not sure kind of what, I don't know. To me, that sounds more in line with Damon's character, because I feel like Damon is the type of person that he wouldn't really care if things are wrong. Obviously, he does have a line somewhere, but it just, I don't know. That being upset about the power dynamic seemed more within line of Damon's character for me. But anyway, so then Rhaenyra goes back to the keep and gets down with Kristen Cole, and is like, oh, let's do it. And so she, at least, it was, I feel like this is weird, so I hope this isn't weird to say, but one of the things that I liked about that whole scene, because so that was playing out at the same time as Viserys and Alicent's intimate scene was playing out, and it felt like one of the things that I can't remember if it was Damon that told. There's a point in the episode where they're talking about how women aren't supposed to get joy from sex, that they're basically there to have babies, and that's it. And so I really liked the contrast between these two scenes, because it showed, one, how different the situations are, where Alicent is almost basically trapped in this marriage, and Rhaenyra gets to do what she wants within reason. But it also showed that Alicent is just there as the baby maker, and Rhaenyra, it shows that she's actually enjoying herself. And so I just thought it was a really, really cool dynamic to kind of show the different things there. And I'm sure that this will also build resentment from Alicent to Rhaenyra, that when she kind of sees that Rhaenyra is able to go take what she wants and do what she wants, and Alicent is stuck as the queen, which seems like kind of a silly thing to say, but it also is kind of true. And so I really liked that dynamic. I thought that was kind of cool. But I also feel like because it's sex scenes, you try and say something insightful about it, and everyone's just going to call you out and be like, oh no, you're just perving out over it. It's like, no, look, if I want to find that, it's on the internet. There's ways that's not what I'm here for. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then one of the other things that I really liked is that up until this point, it feels like Viserys is, I wouldn't say that he's unaware of the scheming that Otto does, but it's almost that he doesn't care. Because earlier in the episode, he talks to Rhaenyra about how she's talking. So she specifically points out Otto and says, like, he's trying to manipulate stuff, and he's putting Alicent on the throne. How can you not see that? He's only in it for his self-interests. And Viserys responds back with basically, everyone in power is in it for their self-interest. He says, everyone in the throne room, everyone on the small council, they're all in it for their self-interests. And so it seemed like that was almost used as sort of a justification for him to not care about what Otto was doing, because he's like, well, it doesn't matter who it is, everyone's going to be trying to do stuff for themselves. But then at the end of the episode, I really liked this part where Viserys and Rhaenyra are talking, and they kind of get into a disagreement again about the whole marriage thing, and eventually it ends with Rhaenyra saying, all right, fine, I'll do my duty. I will marry Laenor Velaryon, because Viserys says he's basically like, you know what, you lost your chance to pick your husband, this is who you're marrying, get over it. And so she says, okay, fine, I'll do my duty, I will marry him as long as you do your duty as king. And what she means by that is him basically getting rid of Otto, because Otto is doing his scheming. And so I really liked that scene, just because it shows, I mean, I feel like that's kind of a pretty in this world, that's a very fitting way for events to play out. And so I really liked that, but it also showed that Rhaenyra is willing to take one for the team, essentially, and do what's needed. And that's always something that you kind of worry about, because up until this point, she was very rebellious and very free spirited. And, there comes a point where you're like, okay, I know you don't want to do it, but you kind of have to. That's just how it works. And so I thought that was cool. But then it also builds further resentment between Otto and Viserys, obviously, because he gets fired, but I'm sure that this will also build more resentment between Alicent and Viserys, and Alicent and Rhaenyra as well. And because they're her dad's getting fired, and even though I'm sure that she has complicated feelings about her father, it's like a slight on the family's honor and a slight against their house and things like that. And so it was just, there was a lot of really good groundwork being laid this episode, I thought. And I really liked that, because I believe the plan, and I think I've mentioned this before in prior videos as well, I believe that the plan is about 5 seasons of this show. And so to me, the dance would only be, well, not that in order for it to really, really sell, I think that they have to do enough to make both sides feel sympathetic enough. You're never going to make one side feel like they are the good guys while the other side are the bad guys, I don't think, because there's enough crap that both sides pull that you can't make it seem black and white. And so I feel like, even though the end of the Dance with Dragons is already established in the official canon, so we know, people who have read the books know how it's going to end, I still feel like it makes for a lot more compelling television to make both sides sympathetic enough that it's not just straight black and white, oh, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. And so I feel like this episode did a lot to really lay that groundwork and make it seem like both Rhaenyra and Alicent are going to have pretty valid reasons for wanting the things that they do, and for wanting their children to be the ones that are that take the throne and that are seen as the king going forward. So really, really solid episode. I really liked it. One thing I thought was a little unnecessary was, and this felt kind of in a similar vein to, because I don't remember this happening in the book, but again, it's been a while since I've read it, so it's possible that I just forgot. But there's a point where Rhaenyra and Viserys are talking, and he brings up the actual cat's paw dagger used in Game of Thrones that was used to attempt to assassinate Bran. And so while that was kind of a fun Easter egg to be like, oh hey, it's the dagger, that's cool, Viserys pulls it out of a fire. It's in like a little fire grate thing, and he pulls it out so the blade's glowing. And then on it has basically the prophecy of Azor Ahai. And I have no idea if I'm saying that right, but that's how I've always said it in my head, where, my children will be, basically theirs will be the Song of Ice and Fire, and they'll be the ones to save every, that whole thing. And I don't recall that being on the dagger in Game of Thrones, but it also feels like it's kind of leaning into a similar thing from the first episode, where Viserys is talking to Rhaenyra about how the reason that Aegon came to conquer was because he had the vision about the walkers and everything. And it just, I don't know. I feel like leaning into that, I don't know. I'm very, very picky when it comes to movies that deal with prophecies and things like that. And so obviously that's kind of just a subjective thing. Someone might feel differently, and that's entirely valid. But I don't know. It just, to me, that feels like, do we really need that? That doesn't seem very necessary. It felt kind of similar to the Aegon having dream about the walkers, in the sense that we don't need, to me, that tries to paint more broad strokes of general black and white when it comes to actions that people take. And in this world, I don't feel like that's very fitting. It's, the entire point of this world, well, one of the entire points, is that people are neither all good or all bad. There are bad people that can do good things, and there are good people that can do bad things. And so trying to make it as some sort of prophetic duty that they have to protect the realm. Like that just, to me, that tries to make them seem more black and white than they are, and I don't love that. But it also could have just been done as like an Easter egg type fun thing. So I guess it will depend on how much, because when after Rhaenyra reads that off the blade of the dagger, then Viserys tells her like, this is the most important secret that you'll ever know, or whatever, something like that. And so if it continually comes back where she's like, I've been prophesied that I am the one that's going to say, that just, I don't know, that doesn't really work for me, but we'll have to wait and see. The only one of the things I actually really like about Game of Thrones is with everything with the High Sparrow, because I feel like it's done well enough where you don't know if he really is that devout or if he's just full of crap and he's drunk on the power and he's using it because he can. And so that's not exactly prophecies, but that's the kind of stuff that I like, where it's sort of being a character hiding behind something and using it for, it's, I mean, now that I think about it, that's not really relevant, but it was, my point was that, went on a bit of a tangent here, I'm sorry, but my point was that I'm very, very picky about prophecies and stuff like that. So I'm not writing it off yet, because it will depend on where it goes. If it ends up just being a one moment type Easter egg thing, all right, fair enough, I can live with it. That's not a big deal. But if it ends up being a recurring thing where Rhaenyra is adamant about how she's the prophesied savior of the house and that she needs to be on the throne and all that stuff, I don't remember that from the book either, and so I wouldn't love that idea, but we'll have to wait and see. So anyways, that is episode 4. Still really enjoying the show so far. It's not perfect, of course, but it's at the very least, it's better than the latter half of Game of Thrones, and to me, that's a win. So I'm pretty sure I've said that maybe even verbatim in prior videos before, but I will do my best to make sure that life doesn't get in the way going forward, and that I'll be able to review all of the episodes, and then we'll definitely do a season, kind of just a review of the season as a whole once the show's done. Also, I was able to play quite a bit more of the Last of Us Part 1 today, so I'm hoping to get that review out. I mean, it definitely won't be this week. I'm hoping by the end of next week, though, that I'll be able to finish the game and get the review out. So anyways, yeah, thanks for joining me here, guys, and I'll talk to you guys later. See ya.